Welcome everyone. As we do customarily, we will say a few words to collect our thoughts, light a candle before proceeding with the moot. Edkväll sinne från nattogny och redan morgon mitt i tolka sinne och gave sitt om den sigel. Det aldrig har avsynliga hälsa och infoniga folk. Malet man vid give dock a magen from a likeness from the middle. Brandy Brennans funny there, funny quickest of full mother of money record of Maldi through the enter that's after it. Flame is quickened by flame. A man from another man may become wise, but from conceit may remain ignorant. Truth, like the skies above and beyond us all. Gods of our peoples and lands, may we spend this time together in friendship with you and with each other, and use it to the common good, with profit and with pleasure. Go to the grandest city, go to the most humblest hamlet in both England and in Denmark, where Niels is from. And the buildings most significant of the identity of the place will be the churches. Apart from genetics and geography, Christianity seems to me to have been perhaps the most important factor in European identity over the last 2 millennia. Fortuitously, both Denmark and England are two of the few countries in the world where there's a national church presided over by the head of state, who's also the hereditary monarch. Speaking personally, I cannot imagine a happier union of the individual with society than to live in that state where the religion one follows in the privacy of one's own heart is magnified at large in the customs of one's country. So it's with increasing regret that I regard the fact that I've been unable to take up that opportunity offered to me by having been born an Englishman at this point in history. If I'd been able to be a believing member of the Church of England, I think my life would have been much happier and more successful. I think my principal problem with Christianity lies in the theology, the seeming inconsistency between the Jesus of history and the Jesus of faith, and that is the substance of what we'll be addressing tonight. If Jesus were a pure deity who had never walked the earth of ancient Palestine, a figure purely of faith, that inconsistency would of course disappear. If one understands the absolute through such an abstract figure of faith, then, like a mathematical object, its existence is not provable or disprovable empirically because it's not an empirical object. The more important questions are how it appears in itself, whether it appears to be true and something one can believe in, and whether it has got the power to improve one's life. So maybe the mythicist position, the interpretation that I think Niels broadly follows, that there wasn't a historical Jesus, might offer a more fruitful way for people like me to engage with the Christian heritage of Europe. And I think that there are degrees of the mythicist position. Some maintain that there was no one at all who corresponded with the putative radical rabbi from Nazareth who was executed for sedition by the Romans. While there were some who think that there was but a nominal hook, as it were, onto which the whole mythic panoply is hung. That the future of a historically Christian Europe is to me a mystery. It seems to me quite possible that a major Christian revival would take place, or its Abrahamic successor Islam will succeed here by providing a refuge from the excesses of individualism, feminism and consumerism, or that something substantially new, built upon indigenous Indo-European roots, will grow strong enough to command allegiance. Who knows? Possibly Hindu Dharma may have an unexpected role to play here as well. One thing I'm fairly certain of is that I shall die before the matter becomes clear. But it's a fascinating issue, and I'm very glad Niels is here to speak to us. So Niels, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. And can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So I will start by introducing myself a little bit to begin with. My name is Niels Jørgen. We can just call me Niels tonight because we are in English. Perhaps that's easiest. I'm 38, and I have for the last 5 years been working as a translator, among other things. And today we are going to, well, the invitation said that we are going to talk about how historical is the Jesus of faith. And that is the topic of this book that I've translated. And I'm going to speak from and about this book and go into the subject on the basis of this book. I have sent a PDF file to you, Steve, and I think that if anyone is interested in this book, the English version, of course, I think that you can provide them, or I can do that, with a PDF so they can read it. Before I started working as a translator, I took a philosophy degree from Copenhagen Business School, a sort of philosophy economics degree. And then for the last 5 years, I've been working more or less as a translator and also as an editor. Latest, I have published my father's book, which is this one. My father was Christian Lindtner, who may be known to some of you or may not. I don't know. I think he once spoke at the London Forum, didn't he? I'm not sure. Maybe Michelle remembers. I don't know. Okay, but this is his book, and it's called The Secret of the Christ. So I'll also say a few words about my father and Louise's and Lars's father, our father. My sisters are also here tonight. And he was an indologist, and an indologist is someone who studies the ancient culture of India, someone who is good in Sanskrit, as I also know that you know some Sanskrit, and a little bit, and Pali. And he got his degree in the 80s within indology. And I think I can say that for around the last 30 years or so of his life, or 25 years of his life, he worked quite intensively with comparing the, as he would put it, the Gospels of India, so the Lotus Sutra and other sutras of India, with the Gospels of the New Testament. And so when I took up translating this book, the interest, of course, was I don't know if I would have been aware of the subject at all if it had not been for my father, of course. But this book, well, specifically with the connection between a possible Buddhist influence on the New Testament. And I don't know exactly, have a feeling about how much this audience know or not. But of course, to say that is a controversial thing in itself, because if we start explaining, understanding the New Testament, as a text that is inspired by other traditions, then we have already said that it is not a text describing historical events at a certain time 2000 years ago in Galilee. Then we have, to use a academic word, then we have begun understanding the text as a syncretic text rather than a normal historical text. Okay. So I'll tell a little bit about this book. In 2000, it was published in 2011 in England, and I spoke with the widow of the author Jeff Roberts, who is unfortunately was not able to come tonight. She may come later, actually, but I spoke with her, and I don't think it sold very many books in England. But we have another guest here tonight, Colum, who's also with us, and this was Colum was someone who got in touch with my father, and yeah, hi, and I know that Colum is preparing a new edition in Britain that will be released of this book in December 2000 this year. And I should say that in English it's called Jesus 888. In Danish, I've called it Jesus har aldrig levet, which means Jesus never existed. So this book was published in 2012. I remember my father, right here actually in this living room where I am now, he recommended that it should be translated into Danish. I thought to myself, okay, and then, well, I decided to do it. I weighted things for and against, but I decided to do it, and it's some 300 pages or so. And then I probably finished it after a few years, maybe 5 years or something, and then it just lay, and I couldn't find a publisher. But then in 2020 or 2019, I tried again, and then there was a publisher here in Denmark who said, okay, we'll do it. And then it got published, and I can also tell you a little bit about my experience with that. I have made, of course, the title Jesus Never Existed. You will not know it before you try it. You have to try to say that to Christian people. That will spark an enormous emotional reaction. I have been, I tried to make to marketing this book. I made a few Facebook ads, and I have been condemned to hell many times over, even though by all kinds of people. Even though actually I honestly, and I should also stress this one more time perhaps, I don't consider myself as a scientist or a scholar in that way, like my father was. He spent 40 or 50 years with this sort of study, and was working intensively, very much with it every day. I consider myself a translator, and therefore I also hope that you will have show mercy on me, so to speak, because I where I have interest in the subject, as I said, I do not consider myself a scholar in that sense. But I will try to answer any questions that you might have as well as I can. But to tell, yeah, it was very dramatic, the reactions I got from people on Facebook, and I also, when it was published, I can tell you, I was interviewed by a member of Danish Parliament at the Parliament in Copenhagen called Christiansborg. A member of parliament called Nasser Carter, and well, he's sort of a Christian Muslim here in Denmark, very well known. So I tried to make it to spread the message that Jesus never existed, and but of course, when you go into a struggle like this, you also know you have to. It's a very schizophrenic thing, because normally normal human psychology says that if you involve yourself in a struggle, you also want to win. In this case, you know in advance that you cannot win, so you have to fight knowing that you cannot win. Only small victories. But so that's the sort of premise. It's been around for 2,000 years, as expressed, and well, someday it probably may disappear, but or maybe reformed. But it's not a struggle you should stake your emotional life on winning. So that's a little bit about sort of about where I come from, what I do with translating, and my experience with translating this book. And then you might ask me, why I don't. Maybe I should start. Maybe I should like to ask you people, so I know to whom I'm talking to. How many of you, if I may ask, thinks, I don't know, can we get a response?
Yeah, easiest is if people can just put their hands up or down. That's easiest, I think. We can do that.
Okay, I would like to ask how many believes that Thor was a real historical god in Nordic mythology. Thor with his axe.
When you say a historical god, you mean that it can be demonstrated that there were people that believed a form of god called, using the name Thor, as is found in some rune stones and things like that.
No. I do not mean that. I mean, if you believe that there was actually such a person who flew around behind some or whatever it was, and
Do you mean that the god was a human being in some? It was like a physical
yeah,
had a kind of a manifestation.
this is that is what we are told in the myth.
It depends how you read them. I would disagree, and I don't think one has to think of things in terms of a physical object. I mean, deity is an abstract thing, and I don't think you can measure it with a tape measure. So I believe in Thor, but I don't. You know.
Okay, instead of asking a question, I'll make a point instead.
Yeah.
So if we have Nordic mythology, and many of you have heard of Nordic mythology, and one of the main characters there is Thor, and he has an axe. When he throws it, it flies out in the area, and then it returns to his hand.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. And you have it there, and I also have one actually.
Yeah,
but and then I jumped from Nordic mythology. I jumped to the mythology of ancient Greece, and then there you have, for example, the main god Zeus, and Zeus, he would, for example, one of the story goes, he would transform himself into a swan and seduce a pretty lady, and that's or another good tale about Zeus is that his dear beloved daughter Pallas Athena, she would when Hephaestus he cleaved his axe in the forehead of Zeus, she would spring out in full armor with a spear. There's one who believes in Thor. Okay.
Well, yeah.
So, and then then we've been around a story from Nordic mythology and two stories from Greek mythology, and then I suppose if I had asked the question, okay, there was Mike said that he believes in Thor in this way. Then I jumped to Jesus. Otherwise, I would have assumed that you would have said, no, we do not believe in these stories. And then I would go on to Jesus, and we would, who is Jesus? Well, he's a guy who walked on water who was born by a virgin, who was resurrected from the dead, and many other fantastic things, just like Thor, just like Zeus. And then my question would be, why do you discard the stories about Thor and Zeus, but you do not discard the stories about Jesus? But now this wasn't a question, and I just made a point. I'm actually interested in how many of you believe that Jesus is a historical person, but maybe we can go back to that later.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do. I mean, I in preparation for this moot, I have studied the book that the very distinguished scholar Bart Ehrman wrote in addressing this question, which I found very interesting. But I mean, I don't wish to. I want to try and see this idea of the mythic Jesus in a more positive way. Bart Ehrman is very familiar with all the ancient sources, and he thinks there is an absolutely cast iron case for the existence of a historical Jesus. If you compare the evidence for anyone else from the ancient world, there is very good evidence. But I mean, he's not a Christian, and yeah, so he's not really defending the revealed kind of mythological aspects like the virgin birth, which he explains in terms of a misreading of the text in the Greek and so forth. But anyway, sorry, Niels, are you going to give a presentation of the argument of Jeff? How he explains the phenomenon that is Christianity, because it's kind of grown and it's spread. So yeah, it needs some explanation if there wasn't an original person that it's kind of emanated from.
What I will do, Sted, is that I will talk about the chapters, so to say, in the book, because that will, I think, be a good introduction. And I will start with one of the chapters that relates to something you just said, because you just said that there's a lot of evidence about Jesus Christ. And the question is, actually, what evidence is there? And so that's a good place to start. And one of the chapters deals with this question: what sources do we actually have? And so, as everyone will know, of course, our main sources are the Gospels: John, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That is the absolute main sources of Jesus Christ. Then you ask, do we have any other sources than these Gospels? Okay, then Christian apologists, they will answer to that question. Yes, we do. What sources, we ask? Well, there were some Romans, they will say. Who? They will say Tacitus, Sueton, and then also a Jew called Josephus Flavius. So, is that all? No, there's also one more, Diogenes. But that's almost all. That's like what we got. That's it. We have a few Romans, a Jewish historian, and we have the Gospels. So there are no more sources. That is that. Okay, fine. Then Jeff Roberts, in that chapter, he deals with this question. And as I said, I'm not a scholar. What I read from scholarship is that there is a consensus, more or less, that when we are dealing with the sources outside of the Gospels, then we are talking about, if you know the word, interpolations. These texts have been meddled with. These texts have been by the scribes throughout the centuries, have been fixed so that they fit the story. So, in other words, they are unreliable sources. The external sources, and when I talk about external sources, I am referring to those sources that does not have anything to do with the New Testament and the four Gospels. Okay, so when you say there are good sources, well, Jeff would highly dispute that. Very much so.
If I may briefly say, who would you compare Jesus, who was born from very humble origins, to say that there were bad sources? Uh, Almost all of the people from the ancient world left no evidence at all of their life. Even someone like Josephus, that you mentioned, he wrote a multi-volume history of the Jewish people. As far as I understand it, there is no other evidence of him than that text. So
Yeah.
lots of, I mean, someone like Pontius Pilate as well, who was a very prominent man. As far as I'm aware, there is no evidence. It's hardly, there's less evidence for him than Jesus. But anyway, I must be quiet because it's not my
No. I
purpose
actually
to.
agree the interaction because I get a feeling of where we are and everything. I'm not used to speaking, so I will say this: that you make a mistake because your mistake is that you say uh, you're comparing two things that are incomparable because you're saying, well, you're saying, generally speaking, people like Josephus, well, we don't have any source, we don't have many sources for him, so it's quite understandable that we don't have many sources for Jesus. But these two cannot be compared. Why not? Because in the instance of Jesus, he's not a normal man. What's being told about Jesus is that he transcends God's laws. He flies in the sky like a bird. He walks on the water like I don't know what, and so on. So they are incomparable. So it's not there's not anything when we talk about Flavius Josephus, we don't uh, we don't have to prove something exceptional. Well, it's told that he participated in the Jewish war and that he married into the Roman uh, royal dynasty, uh, and not anything unusual. He didn't fly around in the sky. He wasn't resurrecting people or anything to that effect. So we don't need special sources for that, really.
Just say
It's
something. I've been raising my hand.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, AJ. Go
I'm
ahead.
just
Sorry.
doing electrons here. There's a little reactions thing. No, I just want to point out that although I agree with Niels completely, there is no objective evidence for the existence of Jesus as a man. I'm not saying he didn't exist. I'm saying there is no evidence other than the New Testament and some passages from Josephus that are clearly fake and everybody knows they're fake, right? On the other hand, there are inscriptions bearing the name of Pontius Pilate as prefect of Judea. There are records of Josephus having existed and being in the court of Emperor Augustus, right? He was there. They were people. Now, it could be that what Josephus said was not true because he is not considered a reliable source by historians because he was very biased. But was he a person that existed? Absolutely, right? Was Pontius Pilate a person? We know a lot about Pontius Pilate from other sources. The fact that he was in Britain for a while, that he was recalled for bad behavior, he was there, and then he was prefect of Judea. There are a lot of evidence for historical figures having existed. Now, people make up stuff about them, to embellish the tale, but those people existed. However, none of the New Testament are actual eyewitness accounts. None of them. The things that are named Matthew, John, all this, the Bible scholars, even religious Bible scholars, no longer believe that those were the apostles that they were named after. Paul himself never said he saw Jesus in the flesh, right? He saw visions of a divine being. He didn't see Jesus walking around. In fact, we have no records that there was a Jesus walking around. So it's very different. There's plenty of evidence for King Herod. He built all kinds of stuff. He's in the historical record, of Pilate, of all these people. There's plenty of record for historical figures from that era, right? But direct evidence for Jesus, now I don't know whether he existed or not. I'm waiting to hear what Niels has to say. But as far as it being comparable to all the people in that period, hell no. There are statues and histories and all kinds of documentation that Many people from that era actually lived and were there. However, that is not obtained for Jesus. No reliable testimony that people have not shown to be fake, and nobody who actually saw him. That many of these gospels were written in the 2nd century or whatever, after he was clearly gone, and they were ascribed to these apostles. But it is quite likely that the apostles were illiterate and couldn't write anything. I'm not disrespecting the apostles. I'm just saying they were Galilean fishermen and stuff like that. These were not literate people. They couldn't have written anything. They didn't write anything. So sorry, Niels, I don't want to steal your thunder.
No.
To agree with you, because the idea that there were no records from 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire kept copious records of all kinds of people. So did Judea. We have kings of Judea that are attested to historically. Then they built palaces, they built cities, they were there. Now what people say about them is something else, because people tend to elaborate. But were they real people? There's no question. Was Jesus a real person? Frankly, I studied this situation too, and I don't know, because there is no hard evidence of his existence. So sorry to just butt in, but people were blurring things, and it's not true. There's no question that the emperors and the prefect of Judea and the king, these people existed, the real king. Okay, so I'll shut up, but I just wanted to correct that,
No, thanks very much, Aja. My understanding is that in the case of Pontius Pilate, there is less independent evidence of his existence than Jesus, in that there is just one inscription. I think it was found in 1963 or something, and my understanding is mainly from Bart Ehrman. So I'm anyway. But let's hand the matter back to Niels. Niels, but generally, do you mind people making points? I presumably not. I mean, this is a fairly open, but
no, I prefer that.
Okay,
I don't mind it being sort of a discussion back and forth, actually. So I really appreciate Aurelio's contribution there. And
AJ, no, that's how he's normally.
AJ,
AJ, that's it. Yeah.
So, and I agree with the points that were made, and then then there's the question. Well, he said also that he was in doubt whether or not he was a historical person. So the point I would make here, and I think that's Jeff Roberts' point as well, is that, well, since we don't really have any reliable sources about Jesus Christ, we have disregarded the Roman sources, Tacitus, Suetonius, and we have also disregarded Flavius Josephus. So with those gone, we have the Gospels left. Well, but are the Gospels reliable sources? Well, we can go deeper into that. But basically, if we want to keep it simple, and it is really, the truth is always simple. Basically, these Gospels are unreliable because they are filled with things that all the time contradicts reason. They're filled with something that otherwise people would say, no, that cannot happen. So if we go as far as I go here, and as Jeff Roberts and many others do, well, they're not reliable, basically, the Gospels. Then we get to a situation, then we get to a point, which also actually, but that is another story. Many Danish theologians have reached this point. They say, well, then we don't really know anything about Jesus, because we don't have any sources left. And then they start speaking about that Jesus is beyond the text. But that's not really, doesn't matter now what the Danish theologians say. The point is that when we look at the sources, we must say they're not reliable, and we don't have anything to support our historical Jesus. We don't have any reliable sources. So if you ask someone, and that's quite interesting, if you ask a Danish theologian or anyone within this field, what can they say with certainty about Jesus? It amounts to zero. And that's why we can uphold as a possibility that someone existed. But normally, if we are going to speak together like men and in a sensible way, then we should only speak about things that we know. And the truth is that we don't have any reliable source to historical Jesus where we can speak with certainty of things. We cannot do that here. So that's the short way to present it. I would actually say. I don't know if that made sense to you, but the problem is that we don't have any reliable sources. That's okay. I don't know if you have any comments to that, but otherwise I'll go on.
Well, I suppose the main thing one has to do is come up with an explanation that explains how Christianity came into being and developed. And in the ancient world, as far as I'm aware, the explanation was, that it was a movement that emanated from a particular figure called Jesus, and that roughly corresponds as an explanation of how Christianity came into being. I think if one's going to say that there wasn't a figure, that actually initiated the whole thing, there has to be because that is the most straightforward explanation. Christianity is the result of the existence of one has to offer maybe another explanation of how Christianity, which there's copious evidence of the existence of, I mean, it exists now, how that came into being. And as far as I'm aware, there is no single fact that is irrefutable that means that one has to reject the hypothesis that Jesus was a real figure. And as there's no single irrefutable fact to reject it, that is the simplest explanation. To assume that there was a historical Jesus is the easiest explanation for the phenomenon of Christianity, for the complex phenomena of the Gospels. And the Gospels are, they're independent. I mean, there were various writers. They didn't know Jesus, but there's also there's the writings of Paul, and he's very significant because he speaks about he didn't meet Jesus, but he speaks about meeting James, who is his brother, and that seems a fairly well established thing in all the documents that Jesus was the brother of James. And clearly, if someone has a brother, then they exist. Another interesting fact that is the crucifixion, is the fact that Jesus was the Messiah, regarded as the Messiah, who was put to death in this way. That is to be taken seriously on the basis of the principle of dissimilarity, in that it really wasn't what a Messiah should have been, according to Jewish tradition. The Messiah should have been someone that was a successful figure, not a failure that was that was executed in this rather shameful way, because it didn't really fit in with Jewish theology. Another fact is the way Jesus is supposed to have been baptized by John the Baptist. Now, that doesn't really fit in with Christian theology, because to baptize someone is to cleanse them of their sins, and if Jesus was sinless, there wouldn't have been a point for that. And I think that is mentioned by a lot of the independent sources that are subsumed with it within the Gospels. I think Josephus mentions it as well. So that is very likely that he'd had contact with this figure, and that doesn't really fit in with the Christian theologies that developed. So it maybe is likely to be true as it doesn't fit in. But sorry, Niels, what's the mythicist explanation for Christianity? I suppose that's what I'm asking.
Okay, I'll say two things. I'll say two things. You say that the obvious explanation for Christianity blossoming up is that there was a historical Jesus. Okay, I don't agree. So we can make a parallel with Homer, and how did the Greek gods come into being? Well, we can either stick to what you say. The most obvious thing is that they actually lived on top of the Olymp in Greek, where I have actually climbed once with Stephanos, who's usually here as well.
Oh, really? Great.
Yeah. And I was up at the throne of Zeus anyway. And that's then if we could prolong your argument from before, we could say that's the obvious thing. But in truth, I think today we all agree, because we don't believe in Greek mythology, that what actually happened is that someone, we haven't identified Homer, but we all agree maybe Homer was two men. It's speculated, or more. And so we all agree that it probably happened to begin with oral traditions, and later on written traditions. And then the Greek gods come into being like so. Okay. So
sorry, can you just clarify? So you're saying the explanation of Homer is that there was a poet who brought together the traditions that gave forth to the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Yeah, exactly. And well, the wars might have been actually events, but if you read Homer, you will find that there are many detailed descriptions about how the gods they interact and what they do and so. And I was addressing that part of the Iliad now. Not there are probably historical events behind the war and so, but concerning the gods, we can either stick to what you say, that they actually existed and lived up at the Olymp and so on and so on and so on and so on, or we can say, okay, this was something that was created in the mind of a poet. And then we can also transfer that to where we came from and say, well, the stories about Jesus was something that was created in the mind of a scribe, maybe. And it was not inspired from historical events, from a man walking on water and so on. It was the creation of something that happened in the mind of a scribe, a learned scribe.
But the gods, Zeus wasn't supposed to have, as far as I'm aware, wasn't supposed to have been born in a particular town and at a particular time, and it wasn't. There wasn't a narrative as if he was a normal man. He was a deity, a pure deity. So whereas Jesus was, his parents lived it. He was spoken about as like a normal person. So I did, yeah. So in that sense, I don't think they're quite the same, really.
Okay. Well, he was announced by Gabriel, the archangel, that this was the Son of God who was going to be born. So I don't see anything human about Jesus, really, in the gospel. I didn't see a human Jesus at all.
But yeah,
But
perhaps
that's my point of view.
So give a sort of a timeline then to how Christianity arose in the absence of a historical figure.
Yeah. Okay. I think what we are working with. I will refer from the scholars now, and not Niels Jørgen Lindtner. So I think a scholar like Jeff Roberts, and I know also my father, they worked with the hypothesis that Christianity was probably created in Alexandria, and it was probably created in the 1st century. Okay, and to comment on the Buddhist influence, possible Buddhist influence, but we're talking about something that is happening in Alexandria in Egypt, and so to establish so there's some learned persons in Alexandria. That is the hypothesis of Jeff Roberts, and also I know my father and many others. I would why they did it, that's also a question. I would refer to the movie called Caesar's Messiah by Joe Atwill. I suggest everyone to watch that if they're interested in this topic. It takes around 2 hours, and that there's a plausible therein is given an explanation as to why and also who did it, who wrote it, who came up with it. In that movie, the answer is it was actually Flavius Josephus who played a main role in all of this, in creating this. And
okay, sorry. Yeah.
And it was okay. The work was commissioned by the Roman dynasty, Titus and Vespasian, and in this movie and by Joe Atwill, it is explained that it was sort of made to create calm in Judea. This was this is given as the political motivation for creating Christianity, to create calm and peace where all these wild Jews are roaming around. And so this is one explanation. This is one explanation as to who did it, a Roman dynasty, and where it happened, Alexandria, and the motivation to create stability where there was instability. That is one explanation. And then there's a question also, why did it get the package it got? Why did it come to be as it is today when we have the Testament in our hands? And that is a question, of course, other people are much better than answering than I am, really. But if one reads Jeff Roberts' book, he has a huge, I think he has 4 chapters devoted to tracing influence from different parts of the world. He has a chapter devoted to what influence could possibly come from Egypt. He has a chapter devoted to what influence could possibly come from India. He has a chapter devoted to what influence came from the Hellenic world, where we have these Greek gods, Dionysus and Attis and other gods. So he invests a lot of time and many pages of this book to go into and examine other cultural spheres, to look at their religions, compare, and could it be that, oh, the Buddha also walked on water? Maybe the scribes in Alexandria found their inspiration from reading and studying Indian texts. Or he looked into the Hellenic world where he sees that, oh, there's a Greek god called Attis who was actually hanged on a tree, just like it says in Paul that Jesus was also hanged on a tree. And so that is also taking up a huge part of the book, and that addresses the question as to why Christianity is as Christianity is.
Right, so if I may just try to recap what you said, Niels. You think that there were learned people possibly in Alexandria or from Egypt, and possibly Josephus, you say, who I mean, are these the authors of the Gospels?
We don't know anything about any of the authors,
Because
but so it's speculation.
Because I mean, I think on grounds of the examination of the language used, the manuscript edition, and so forth, there's a fairly strong consensus that the Gospels were written between sort of 30 and sort of 90 years after the date that we know as when year 0 or whatever. So if he hadn't existed and they was written that time, then there would have been people alive that could have said, well, no, that's not really the case. So just I was there, this person wasn't there. So if you're writing about something that was supposed to have existed 200 years in the past, then there wouldn't be anyone alive. But if Gospels are written that early, then there would have been a problem with the fact that a lot of people would have known that he didn't exist if he didn't exist. That is one thing that does occur to me. But so if anyone else would like to comment, please. This is a fairly. Sorry, I didn't see your hand. It's the same colour as your bookcase. Sorry.
Yeah, so it is. It's okay. I mean, it's such a fascinating subject, and I don't want to hog it either, and everybody probably wants to talk about it. I'll just throw in a few points. I'm a bit surprised that you said that about everybody knows that the Gospels were written so soon after the supposed death of Jesus Christ. But I think that probably take too long to go into details of that. I think the important point is that a lot of people would consider Paul as the founder of Christianity, not Jesus Christ. Of course,
absolutely.
Nietzsche considered that. And the way he writes with his letters, he seems to be an incredibly active person and really determined. And he's not interested in miracles at all. I don't think he doesn't even mention a miracle as far as I remember. He just simply says, you know, we believe in the resurrection. That's one miracle he really does. Okay, one miracle. And that is the be all and end all of Christianity. I think it shouldn't be forgotten that the church was very, very active, or Christians were very active very early on in destroying anything they didn't like. So there could have been a lot of references to Jesus Christ, which were not flattering enough or not orthodox enough. There was also the burning of the library in Alexandria. And I can't remember when that was, but then there was Leo I, who said that it was a death penalty for anybody who even tried to refer to gospels other than the 4 gospels that the church had decided were canon gospels. As you know, of course, there are about 6 or 7 other gospels, which I haven't read. And there's one point Alain de Benoit made in his book, which might interest some people if you read French. It's called L'homme qui n'avait pas de père. It was published, The Man Who Didn't Have a Father, published last year, about this very subject. And he does tend to believe that Jesus Christ exists. And he makes the interesting point. If it was some kind of a conspiracy, it's a sort of ironical point, the Gospels would be more coherent. They would fit with each other, but they're very bad conspirators because the Gospels contradict each other. It's kind of, it reads much more like people who want to believe something. I mean, the despairing cry on the cross, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, and it's Eloi, I think, in Matthew, and Eli in Mark, so they can't even decide if he cried out in Hebrew or Aramaic. They can't even get that right. And then sometimes the mother of Jesus is right up against the cross, and then she's far away in another gospel, and so on and so on. It doesn't look like a conspiracy. It looks like people who are inspired by some kind of a memory or a memory of a memory. And I could say a lot more, but those would just be the points I would sort of throw in. But definitely with that point about Paul, I mean, I think that's how the religion developed. I think he was the founder of Christianity.
Absolutely.
And he used this account of a rebel who probably existed, but we don't know, maybe who didn't exist, to build up this incredible church, which took the Jewish message of reform out of Judaism to the whole world. I mean, that was his point. And the big disagreement with James, who wanted to keep this movement within Judaism. All this stuff about being circumcised.
So I'll just make a quick point to that. And in Jeff Roberts' book here, which I'm working with, there's one chapter devoted to Paul, only to Paul. And Paul, the person who called himself te ektroma, which means a sick person, anyway. But the thing about Paul is that if you read the letters of Paul, and Jeff Roberts has an eye for that, it strikes you that, and I think you mentioned that too before, Sted, that Paul is like a witness that is not a witness. He doesn't have anything about what would be obvious for other people to write about. Like if we here at this Zoom meeting all of a sudden saw Sted spraying out some wings he's hiding us on his back, everyone would notice, and none of us would forget it ever again for the rest of our lives. If you could fly around in the room in front of the camera right now, none of us would forget it. The thing about Paul is that he's assumingly, assertedly, a person who has witnessed the Son of God walking around, flying in the air, or at least hearing it from the disciples whom he met, and so on. But he almost doesn't have anything about it. It's very, very weird. It's very, very weird. And I think that's also being considered and discussed in this book, and I know that it is something that people who goes into this field, they observe, and very weird, because it's obvious to everyone that it is the miracles that are interesting. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about Jesus, and that is exactly what Paul he lefts out. So it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that was just my
May I,
comment.
may I speak up again for a moment?
Yes, of course, please.
Okay. I want to preface this with I'm friendly to Niels' idea. I think it's plausible because I see no objective evidence that Jesus actually existed. Now, that doesn't mean absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. On the other hand, the fact that there was all these myths about flying around and raising the dead doesn't mean that a historical Jesus was impossible. There have been many historical figures and heroes to which people accrue legends. For example, here in the United States, two great presidents, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, there's this whole story about him having chopped down the cherry tree and confessed it to his father because I cannot tell a lie. This never happened, okay? And this was only a couple of hundred years ago, and they make up this stuff. However, there is no question that George Washington existed and was the first president of the United States. Similarly, Abraham Lincoln, you probably all heard of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
There's the story we're taught as children that he grew up in a log cabin, right? His family was an affluent Midwestern family. He himself was a lawyer. He wasn't some kind of country bumpkin that grew up in a log cabin. This is false. They made that up in order to glorify Lincoln. Similarly, many people believe that there was such a person as Siddhartha Gautama, the founder of Buddhism. However, even though he didn't want to be worshipped as a god, right? People made up all kinds of legends. In fact, birth narratives, just like Jesus's, miraculous events at the birth of Buddha, which probably would have freaked him out had he heard these things, right? Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu wrote a very good book. I've read it, Tao Te Ching, right? Founder of a major branch of Chinese philosophy. Later, it was invented that he spent 100 years in his mother's womb, and that's how he was born so wise. Nobody believes that, okay? Nevertheless, did Lao Tzu exist? Yes, unquestionably Lao Tzu existed, but spending 100 years in his mother's womb, anyone with any background in biology would tell you that's not possible. So I think it's a false dichotomy to say either Jesus existed as this, demigod-like figure, or he didn't exist at all. There are all kinds of intermediate explanations.
Yeah.
He was a fact, a Jewish itinerant preacher and faith healer, got into trouble with the authorities. There was a lot of sedition in the air back then, okay? In fact, the Jews rebelled completely against Rome in the 60s AD. So I could believe that there was a rebel like that. Now, flying through the air, maybe not. But I don't see all those miracles as proving that he didn't exist at all. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. If I may comment, I would only say that I would only say that the thing is that with these other historical persons you mentioned, Lao Tzu, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and so on, how is it with the sources? The trouble with Jesus is that it is precisely our main sources that have all of the untrustworthy stories within the narratives, and that makes them a little bit unreliable. And so the trouble is we don't, in regards to Lao Tzu, George Washington, and Abraham Lincoln, we have other sources to document. Oh, Lincoln, he went there to Washington, and so on. But and then it's okay. But the trouble is that we cannot really rely on our gospels very much because they have all these stories. And so that's the thing. That's how I would react. But
Thanks. I can I just ask Michael. Is Michael gone? I was just going to ask Professor York what his view was. I think he said he had to go, but he's gone. Alan.
He sent a message that he had another view, which is published in a book, but the book is not in print, I think.
Yeah, it would be good to have asked him. But Alan, you're please unmute, and then Alan, you must unmute yourself.
Oh, right.
That's it.
Many thanks. I think a fascinating talk by Niels. Many thanks. I've studied the subject in quite some depth, and I've come to the conclusion, basically, that the so-called historical character of Jesus is made up of several different people and it amalgamated into one person. There's been some very good points made here. AJ made some excellent point. Michael has about the inconsistencies of the Gospels. But I'm going to be quick. I could go on all night. But two specific things which I'd like to ask of Niels. I must read the book, incidentally. But before I read it, they might be included in it. Two theories I heard during my times in South Africa. One was that the Beatitudes, blessed are the cheese makers, etc., which is, I think, the only real story which is in all four Gospels. That is a direct plagiarism of works of the Buddha. And of course, the Buddha lived several centuries before the Christ character. The second, I can see Niels nodding there, so that must be something which is pretty well established. Okay. The second was given to me by a chap who was not quite so learned as the person who told me about the Buddha collection, and that was that the story about crucifixion was basically came from the true story of Spartacus, because the normal death penalties in the Roman Empire was ceremonial stabbing for the upper classes and stoning for the lower classes. Crucifixion was practically unknown, except in one very verifiable historical context, and that was after Spartacus and the slaves revolt got caught and then all accounted for. So the question to Niels is, can you give your opinions about both these two theories about certain facets of the Christ character? As I say, there's many more I could quote, but those two.
Excellent questions.
Thank you so much for that question. And I'm embarrassed that I should say that I am that I feel as if my being is being transgressed a little bit here, because it is quite beyond me. I feel as if we're walking into the scholars area, I would say.
Yeah.
Please don't regard me as a scholar.
Good question. But I would say that listening and speaking with for many years with my father, he was this indologist. And he would also stress, for example, that one of the first to see a similarity between Christianity and Buddhism on the level of their message being the same, like in the Beatitudes. It was Arthur Schopenhauer in the 18th century, and many other people have done that, including Jeff Roberts, who also makes like, okay, the Buddha said this, and then just below he finds one expression of the Buddha, and then just below he has one expression of Jesus Christ, and then you can see, okay, their message seems to be so identical. But I don't think I have a qualified opinion myself as to say this is how it is, or the inspiration come from this area in the world. That is I think beyond me, I'm afraid. I can speculate, but that is beyond me. And I suppose, and I'm a little bit sad that I cannot answer as well as I should like, but I think the same goes for the question about the cross. I would find it interesting. I just reread the book here before this Zoom meeting, that Jeff Roberts, he sees that the Greek god Attis, he was hanged on a tree as a punishment, and was there for 3 days, taken down, and he was resurrected. In Paul, unlike we're used to Jesus being put on a cross, like Spartacus, but in Paul it says that he was not on a cross but on a tree, like we see outside. And if we go with that, then we have a very nice similarity with Attis. And so, is that actually where the inspiration came from? It is beyond me. Maybe if I go on this road in my life and study for 30 years, then I have a qualified opinion. But as it is, I feel like I'm a translator. I can speculate, but I can not answer as well as I should like.
I think that's a very wise.
Many thanks for attempting anyway, Niels.
Yeah, I really agree with that, Niels. All of these areas are extremely large and do require extensive research. And I think if someone thinks that he can easily grasp the matter, one should be very suspicious of him, because they are just a vast subjects. It's not easy to get information about the ancient world. Right? It's not at all easy. The subject of crucifixion is very interesting. I've not heard that. I mean, from what I've read, I from secondhand, I understood that crucifixion was a very common punishment in the Middle East under the Romans, and that thousands of other people were crucified as well. But I've not heard Alan's point, but that's very interesting, and it's not for me to say it's right or wrong.
Yeah, I would just make a small point there, Stead. As far as I know,
go on.
There's a little bit of confusion between crucifixion and hanging people up. Apparently, crucifixion, I mean, they were a hard lot in those days, but they regarded it as pretty rough death. And crucifixion was, as really putting in nails or hang a person who was fully alive was unusual, I think. People were killed and then hanged up on these trees or gallows to be eaten by birds. But I think it was a total disgrace, and only for the worst kind of criminals, that as I understand, and that was what was so really hard about Spartacus and all the slaves lined to the Appian Way, that they were crucified, really, they were alive and put up there. And I think that was not necessarily typical. So it's quite possible to imagine Jesus having been beaten to death, having been done to death, and then put up, also as a course of warning, on a kind of gallows. And Paul was the one, of course, who stressed the importance of the cross as a symbol of resurrection.
I mean, my point was actually that there's so many facets of the Christ character which come from different sources. In other words, he was no one single entity. And the bit about the crucifixion was taken purely from the Spartacus era. This wasn't my theory, as I say. It was just given to me by a colleague in Sydow. That they brought, the Spartacus death, transferred it to the Christ character.
Thank you. Vladimir, sorry, you've had your hand up, please.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
I would like to mention one not very well-known historical fact about crucifixion, and namely, it probably everybody knows there was a fight for power in Judea between the king of Herodes, who was not a Jew basically, but he was appointed he was ally of Romans, and he was appointed as a king of Judea, and then also as a main priest in the Jerusalem temple. And from other side, there were descendants of original Jewish family, the so-called Maccabees. And the last Maccabee king, so the real Jewish king from the line of David, he was crucified. He was defeated by Romans, and he was crucified in the year, I guess, like in the year 30 BC. So the fact is that the Jewish king, the authentic Jewish king from the David line, was crucified by Romans. But before Jesus, it was just a historical fact. And later, I believe that the Christianity basically is a kind of very synthetical religion, or syncretical religion, a sort of Hellenistical syncretism. And that we can see also in the Buddhism is also the same story. It's a Hellenistical, to my mind, is a Hellenistical syncretical religion, and many other religions. But the fact of crucifixion was later used by so-called early Christians to establish their point of view, to establish their rights.
So, Vladimir, you're saying that there was a precedent for crucifixion for someone that was a person of worth being crucified, not a person of low.
Exactly, and not just a person of worth. The Jewish king, the legal Jewish king, was really crucified by Romans. That's the point.
Where is this written? What's the source for that? I've not heard of that.
You can. It's just Jewish history. It's a very very well known fact, but within the circle of specialists.
Maybe Josephus then is mentioned.
It's Josephus again.
You can
Because I don't know that. Yeah, I mean, he wrote about the history of the Jews. I think he's he's the principal source for all information of that.
But you can just Google the King Antigon and Maccabee dynasty, the Maccabee revolt.
Yeah.
And everything is there.
Okay, interesting. Maybe another angle to this, Niels. What's your thought? Does looking at the syncretic aspects of Christianity, the fact that maybe there's Buddhist influence in some of the teachings, that it relates to some classical myths. Does this help us to come closer to Christianity as a tradition for those of us that have got problems with the historical Jesus? Do you think is this a?
I can give you another parallel. How Christianity is connected to this basic, mystical heritage of the humanity. So actually, the image of Jesus is in certain way very, very similar to image of Yama, the Hindu Yama, or Iranian Yima, or even to Northern Ymir. Remember, the Ymir was a giant, and he was like took apart, and from his body, the reality, this cosmos was created. If we take the Hindu Yama, who is the parallel to Ymir, Hindu Yama was the first creature, the first mortal creation, and the Yama sacrificed himself for himself, according to the Puranas. He was sacrificed, and then, but why did he sacrifice? Because sacrificing himself, he entered so-called the underworld, the hell, and he went through and went out on the other part, on the other side of the hell, and then he discovered the way back to the heaven. And then he is the main ancestor of everybody, of the whole humanity. And in order to show the humanity, to show to his descendants the way to heaven, he made this sacrifice. And then we have Purusha Medha in Hinduism as a human sacrifice. The same story we have with in the Chinese old religion. To the self-sacrifice was the most noble action for everybody. Same in American culture. For example, in Maya religion. In Maya, you might be like you might be realized in the highest way, even not being a believer or not doing any magic, but you have voluntarily to sacrifice yourself, and that's the only way to access the paradise. And then coming back to Christianity, we have the same story, absolutely the same story, but just in covered by local traditions and local histories.
Yeah, it would seem to me that that's one of the reasons why Christianity has worked, because self-sacrifice is something we all can find a meaning in. It's a very powerful ideal by which to live. Niels, yes, sorry, I mean, do you think actually it's a good way to look at our Christian heritage, looking at the mythic side?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think that in all matters of life, and also in our relationship to Christianity, we must seek the truth. And the scribes were right when they put those words in the mouth of Jesus, that he is the way, he is the truth, and he's the life. Life and truth are the same thing. So I think in all matters of life, we have to seek the truth, and getting a right understanding of Christianity is essential. Because as you started out by saying, has been such a dominating force in European history. And that is one step. the looking at Christianity from a Socratic point of view instead of a historical point of view, that is one step towards, in my opinion, a more true and more correct way of understanding it. I might add that my father and I, when he was alive, he died 2 years ago. So I spent a lot of time with my father and discussing these matters, and we would go to church many times together, the Danish Folks Church.
Yes.
And and many times after a ceremony, we would go out of the church, and then the vicar or the priest, he would stand there and he would give his hand, and we will had a little talk, and we would discuss these matters. Quite interesting, their reactions. I will return to that if you're interested. But
yeah, I think
but I'll
that
just finish
yeah.
2 seconds more. But sitting in the church, and when they say what they believe in, we believe in Jesus Christ. I think at that point, this part that we've covered so far in this talk tonight, yes, it is important that we know that many of these things that they believe in, the Christians, it has there are I forget the English word, but we can see those same things in other cultures. They have the baptism are found in other cultures, and so on. The crucifixion is found in other cultures, and so on. So I think it gives a more true, to answer your question, a more true relationship to Christianity. Yes, I will say then at the very last that I have not touched upon 2 subjects which are also hugely important, and that is the role of gematria, which I can address if you like, and then there's the role of a possible astro-theological influence, not just on Christianity, but on all religions altogether. That is to say that all the stories in all the religions, they, except for the spaghetti monster religion and so on, in all the religions have a, so to say, a what is the English word? Has its origin in the sky, and it is it's in fact a celestial story that is being told. This is a subject which as far as I'm concerned, the foremost author in the world, she died in 2015. Her name was Acharya, or D.M. Murdoch. My father, he had a 20-year correspondence with her. So those are 2 subjects that I haven't talked about. We can talk about it, but these 2 subjects, going into these, they will bring us to, in my opinion, the truest conception of Christianity that I have encountered so far in my life.
So the fact that your father and you did find it valuable going to church meant that your interpretation actually allowed you to see something valuable there in the tradition.
So what we did when we went to church is that if you get the conception that Jesus never existed, then you get 2 positions. Then you go to church and you encounter the priest who will say that Jesus did exist, and then you come, Jesus never existed. Of course, then you have a contradiction between 2 people. Then you have a battle, and then it also have ramifications politically, because if you consider someone as a liar, basically, and that's what they are. If you consider the priests as liars, then you have a battle to do, because these people, as in Britain, where you have the Church of England, and here in the Scandinavian countries, they are being paid by the taxpayers. And so these people, there are 2,000 priests in Denmark, and there are some few hundred theologians, all paid by the Danes. And they are, if we analyze it, it's a long logical way to go, but if we analyze it, and that is my conviction, and I spent many years together with my father analyzing it, you get to the conclusion that they are basically liars. And that's also why my father, he could note that to his awareness, and he was well aware of many things, not at one university in Europe at any time has the question at a theological faculty been raised whether or not Jesus was a historical figure. He might have been wrong, but even if he was wrong, and there has been one instance of this, it is still a complete taboo. And so, and they have an interest in it being a taboo, the establishment. Yeah. Okay.
Colm, you have your hand. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Hi, Niels. So, just everyone, I've thanks to Niels, I also spoke to Jeff Roberts' family and said, can we republish Jeff's original book in English? So that, I think we mentioned that earlier, it's coming out in December. Yeah. So for everybody present, and I know Niels has offered the PDF version in English as well. The only real difference I've edited is I've taken out his references to Sherlock Holmes, which which I think was not quite appropriate, particularly. And I've also verified all of his sources. So if you go through the version that I've done, I've completed all of the sources. So you can look up the sources that Jeff had to say there. I think there's a slight cultural dissonance, Niels, between your father's Danish experience of the church and in England, but also in Rome as well. Some of the most leading Catholic theologians, Hans Kung, those of you who read Hans Kung, for example, decades ago, challenged the, he almost got excommunicated for it, but he was allowed back in, have challenged the hierosticity of the Christ character. And those of you that are British and know the Anglican Church well, if you want the most ambiguous version of who Jesus was, go to an Anglican church, because the whole breadth and depth of belief. If anything, Anglicanism is a bit like Judaism. If you ask one Anglican who God is, it'll be different from asking another Anglican who God is, and that's one of the great assets. And I'm reminded what you said, though, something really important. I think I'm a bit of a student of Carl Jung, which is that when you've got such polarized, one-sided opinions, according to Jung, from a psychic point of view, the truth lies in the tension of the opposing forces. Now, whether you buy into that Jungian philosophy or not, but what I think one of the things that Jeff manages to do is to help people that find themselves sitting on this opposite side to fundamentalism and biblical literalism. He empowers them to not feel that they don't have a point of view, or their point of view is not. So Jeff's real aim, as he says in the beginning of his book, was that, what you read in the Bible ain't necessarily so. So he was, I think one of Jeff's, I can't speak for him, he's passed, but what I read into what he's saying in his book is that just because the theologians have told us that this is how it is, and a big bulk of Christian clergy and theologians are telling us this is who Jesus was and this is what we should believe, there are other points of view, and those other points of view are valid because the foundation on which the clergy who are fundamentalist in that sense are basing their own truth is on sand. In other words, the rock on which they build their one-sidedness is actually pretty shaky ground, and that it's fine to hold an opposing view to that and still be Christian and still have faith and still believe. So I think Jeff, I don't think, was saying that the clergy are liars in a true, English, in epistemological sense, like in Houses of Parliament, you're not allowed to actually say somebody is a liar. But the truth lies in the tension between the two, and the role of the individual is to go and try and find that truth for yourself. And I think that's the great value of Jeff's book, is that it gives the individual enough new information based on superb scholarly research. I mean, this book is full. I mean, if you want a reference book on who to go and read on this topic, then it's all in here. It's absolutely, but Jeff didn't make this up. He was relying on some really superb sources, as Neil said. So that's where I think the real value of the book lies, personally, in that it enables us to not have to feel one-sided, and that we're in a battle and we're having to fight against something that is true or isn't true. There is a truth, and it's always going to be our truth. I think that's what Jeff had to say in the end.
But he's not the only person writing about this. I mean, if one goes on YouTube, there are lots of other people putting forward this tradition, and I think it was first mooted, in the 18th century in France. So it does have quite a long.
Yeah, he quotes all those people.
A long tradition, though it's always been a minority view. It's never been a mainstream view, and as far as I know, there's no one in a recognised university that studies the subject of the New Testament or any subject like that believes this. But it's
well, sorry, Steve. In lots of Catholic universities, this is a well-trodden path. Yeah, they would challenge it, absolutely. Yes.
In Roman Catholic, particularly.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Anyone that's you've mentioned?
Well, yeah, I recommend Hans Kung as a starter.
So he thought that it was not at all clear that Jesus existed historically.
Yes, and he said it didn't matter, that it's actually not important as far as that was his theological.
Okay, interesting.
Viewpoint.
Yeah, that's interesting. Linda, you said something in chat about your contact with Anglicans not being. You've got to go, AJ. Oh, well, thanks a lot for your comments. Much appreciated.
Yeah, I had a couple of things there actually. I've just replied to something to Alan. Every Anglican, because I'm involved with the Multi-Faith Centre at the university, and every Anglican priest has always been struggling with their faith. I don't know much about Anglicanism. I was originally a Roman Catholic and then pagan and heathen. And they've always been struggling, and they've always wanted to come along to pagan meetings and know more about paganism or Druidry. And then the last one, which I've just said to Alan, he's been removed. He's been removed from the chaplaincy, and he had a massive problem with the Anglican Church because he had a breakdown at his previous parish church, and because he said the Freemasons were bullying him. To the point where he had to leave. He had a breakdown because he claimed that these Freemasons had him removed, and then he had a time of respite and then returned as the chaplain at the university. And it was all very strange. But a point I just wanted to make separate from that was years ago, back in the early 90s, I met Peter Gandy and Tim Fricke, who wrote the Jesus Mysteries. And the subtitle was Jesus, a Pagan God, and they'd done copious research as well. And theirs was it was a big thing at the time because they were talking about the mythological Jesus, really, and how the myth of Petros and Mithras and Dionysus and Osiris, and how they all feed into the Jesus story. And also they'd archaeologically, which I hadn't realized, where the Vatican is now archaeologically, it was one of the largest temples to Dionysus and Osiris in the world, which I hadn't realized at that time. And when they had the book published and they were doing the book tours, they started getting letters from the Vatican, not like death threats, but quite threatening letters, suggesting they didn't talk about this at the book tours. They didn't talk about this mythological Jesus. They didn't, basically not to talk about their book. And to the point that Tim Freaker was really quite concerned. He was not, I don't know if he was concerned for his life, but he was concerned because he was being threatened. So somebody high up in the echelons of the Roman Catholic Church didn't like what they were saying. So that's still been a hot potato now. You know, that, really interesting.
Anyway, it's good to hear and to read your comments, Linda. I think that we probably got a lot of, or theologically or anti-theologically, I don't know what the best term will be.
Yes.
We've got a lot in common. So, can I, if I can give a little plug, and this will be quick instead. I have actually written 2 articles myself on basically this thing. I was brought up, as most some of you will know, as a Methodist. The first article was. I'll be quick.
Maybe put it in the chat so people can.
Can I just finish? It'll be 5-10 seconds. The first was the Methodist Church's death wish, and the second is the Christian religion's death wish. And some of the people here, the comments they made, they're far more scholarly, far more intellectually than I am. I'd like, if possible, somebody to read through certainly the second one of those 2. Because I'm sure that I've made a few mistakes in it. So if anybody could help, please let me know. I've finished.
Thanks. Yeah, put it in chat. And Niels, yeah, you mentioned two subjects. We've gone to many different places and connections here. So yeah, to fill out the whole picture, maybe perhaps briefly you could mention the other 2 subjects, the celestial and the other.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a really interesting question from Michelle, by the way, in the chat. I think it was like could be. Oh
okay. Michelle, if you're here, well, please ask the question yourself, maybe.
Okay, I can read it.
Okay.
But before I go to Michelle's question, I would just comment on Colum's remarks he made before. But he left now, but I'll still just shortly address it. But he said that rightly that Jeff didn't call the clergymen liars. I would have said, of course, no, he doesn't. That was me that made a mistake. It is me who are calling them liars. Jeff doesn't do that, but of course it is the logical implication of what Jeff is saying when he's saying that Jesus never existed. How could he not make that deduction? Otherwise, that would have just been self-deluded, of course, and then they are not deliberate liars. But that's another option. Okay, and I also agree with what he said about that. Basically, he talked about Jung. And basically what he's saying is that there's a fighting spirit in Jeff Roberts' book, and that's true. There is a challenge, he's challenging, and that's true. And Colum, he said that, well, he thinks that truth is somewhere where there's a sort of contradiction, there's a battle. And I agree with him that it is not irrelevant. You feel that there's something going on. And from the last comment by Linda, who talked about Timothy Frege and Peter Gordy. I haven't read that book. I've heard about it. I wonder if they ever published those letters of the Vatican. I think that would be interesting to see those letters published. I mean, if we have official letters from the Vatican writing such things, that's that's quite revealing.
He withdrew for quite a few years after that. He disappeared. Hasn't written an awful lot since. So I don't know what's happened there. I don't think the letters were ever published, but they did. Something shocked them into that.
Absolutely interesting. If I ever got a threatening letter from the Vatican, I would absolutely publish it, I think.
Well, his view, Peter Gandhi's view was we're not going to stop, because if we carry on doing the book tour and one of us dies, then that'll be even more proof that the Vatican have got against us. So he carried on with the book tour. It's an interesting book. It's well sourced.
Interesting.
Mm.
If I hadn't 1,000 other books I had to read, well, maybe I hope I should read that. Okay, and then Michelle, she asked a question in the chat, and she asked, I'll read aloud the question. Dr. Lindtner, Christian Lindtner, that was my father, suggested to his local churchmen that according to gematria, they were worshipping Zeus. That's true, he did that. Maybe NJ can elaborate. And so that question also, that relates to what you asked me to do, Sted, that perhaps I could elaborate on those two subjects I didn't really touch upon. Okay, and so, okay, well, I'll try to make it brief. So basically what one should know is that the New Testament is written in Greek. Okay. The next thing one should know is that in Greek, they didn't have, like we do, numerals and an alphabet. Like we have a numerals here, and then we have an alphabet here. Their alphabet was also used as numerals. So alpha equals 1, beta equals 2, gamma equals 3, and so on. So, okay, so when we see a Greek word, we can read it. For example, we can see the Greek word Jesus. It has 6 letters, I, E, S, O, U, S, 6 letters. And if we are good at counting in Greek, we can say iota equals 10, eta equals 8, sigma equals 200, omicron equals 70, epsilon equals 400, and sigma equals 200. And so we can see the letter in front of us. And then if we are not only good at letters, but also good at numbers, which are the same in this instance, then we also see a number. And adding those numbers together, for example, in the name of Jesus, gives us the number 888. So Jesus has the number 888. Okay, but Jesus was not the one we wanted to address here. It was Zeus. So this tradition of gematria is a tradition that most people today is not aware of, have never heard of. Many lexicons does not tell about it, at least Danish lexicons. It is a tradition that actually is still alive. It is alive in the Jewish community. Jews, they count learned rabbis, and you can look it up on YouTube if you like. Learned rabbis, they count the text, that is the Old Testament, and then they not only read, they also count, and counting also has meaning. We'll come back to why counting has meaning. I hope you can follow, and you can ask all the questions you like afterwards. So, but when my father says that the local churchmen are actually worshiping Zeus, he can say that because as it is, and that is also a subject of dispute, but as it is, it was the Greeks who first started this tradition of gematria, because we find it within the Pythagorean society around 500 BC. And so the Jews, they hang on, they also take it. And then you get the Kabbalah, you get the rabbis counting, and so on. But it starts with the Pythagoreans 500 before. And then we also see it, and that's why he can say, as he did, because I'm the witness, he could say, as he did, to the local churchmen, that they were actually worshiping Zeus because he had been counting the New Testament, and he would find that gematria, as the Jews used, as the Pythagoreans used, are also being used by the evangelists. And since it is the origin that matters, he can say, and the point is that it is also being used by the Greek theologists like Orpheus, like Homer, because they invented the gods, the Greek gods, but they invented them on a numerical basis. And if you're very confused, I'll also explain to you why they would go through all this effort, because that sort of lacks in the talk. And this is sort of the explanation. So why would you have a system where words also have a numerical value? Okay, I'll give an example. How many days do we have in a year? 365. Okay, so if I make a name, actually in Egypt, there is a god called, a fake god called Abraxas. If you count his name, his numerical value is 365. So in this way, he not only means Abraxas as a word, but he also means a year. So in this way, the numbers, they can refer, in this instance, to how many days there are in a year. They can refer to other things. They could also refer, for example, to the golden ratio, or many other things in the physical world. So names can refer to things in the physical world. And you understand that if I make a name that refers to many interesting things in the physical world, then I give that name more meaning. And so I don't know if my audience can follow me, but maybe you want to make a comment and then I can elaborate, or did this make sense?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what. I think you spoke about the name Jesus and how it could represent numbers, and I think you quoted the sort of S sigma as being sort of 200, the first one or something. I was just wondering how that arose, because I'm assuming, like it would be on the basis of one would be the first letter of the alphabet, and it would just go up incrementally, so the total would only be the total numbers of the alphabet.
Oh, okay, in this way. I have a little. So there's a little table here I could show if I can quickly find it. With the, I don't know if you can see this. I'll just explain it. But these are the numerical values of it. And so you see alpha is 1 and iota is 10 and rho.
Oh, I see. Right. Oh, I see. So that's the tradition in which they were used. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I understand. No, thanks. Yeah. Thanks.
So that's how it goes.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then you get names that is not just names, but are also numerical values. And that is a tradition called gematria. And as I explained, gematria has its foundation in sort of the physical world. And when you, so it also gives a completely new layer. We talked about earlier tonight about how the message of Buddha and Jesus sounded very identical to each other. And so imagine that was one layer of the text. Imagine now if we start comparing the numerals underneath, you see, oh, here are also something that is identical. It gives a completely new layer of things in viewing the text.
Yeah, I mean that's a very big subject, I think. So yeah, perhaps Vladimir, I think perhaps if it's a quick question about this, yeah, Vladimir, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yes, I would like to add briefly. First of all, this gematria is coming from geometry, from Greeks, and this. So we have in the Kabbalah basically is based on Pythagorean tradition. If we go deeper, but what I would like to add, first of all, it's about 365 days in a year. So coming back to Jewish tradition, so we have the old Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar, and with a 254 days or 354 days, I believe. Yes, 354. And then so they have a lunar calendar, and the main ritual was to sacrifice animals. But starting with how to say in English, Essenes, you know, this Qumran
the Essenes, yeah,
Essenes, they were kind of revolutionaries because they used the solar calendar, 365 days, and instead of sacrification, they used baptizing. So they baptized themselves, not just using the blood sacrifice. But what is 365 days? That's a cosmical man. So, and probably this is one of the first attempts in Judaism to go back to this mythology of universal man, 365 days, because Yama is a year, or Yama also in Hinduism is a year. The cosmical man is just a whole year, and that's a solar calendar, not the lunar calendar. So we have already, we can see initial split already in Jewish tradition between the old lunar calendar and the new solar calendar. And then the Christians, they used the solar calendar and Sunday as the first day. So they changed completely the story. But yes, of course, the Christianity, the early Christianity was a part of Judaism. And also I would like to agree with Niels concerning Alexandria and Joseph Flavius. I'm also completely agree with this point of view. I hope it's something that touch the reality more than any other concerns, at least which we have known till now. Yes, thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Vladimir. Niels, perhaps you could briefly describe the other aspect, the celestial influence. I think is that would be interesting.
Yeah, I don't feel like an expert in it, but I can describe the overall thesis. I don't know if I can come up with an example because it's quite far away in my mind. But the thing is that, okay, I would say first that I would recommend everyone here tonight watching, if they haven't already, on YouTube, watch a video called Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist. There will be an introduction of about 20 minutes, which is about this subject. And I can honestly say that the first time I saw this movie, I was very impressed. So I recommend everyone who are interested in watching Zeitgeist. Okay. So the main idea is that that the stories of the New Testament, for example, when Jesus is born, and he is born in Bethlehem, for example, we hear that 3 wise men from the east goes to find and pay homage to the baby Jesus. And how do they find him? They look up into the sky and follow the stars. And what is being said by the astrotheologians is that what that story in the New Testament is really about is about celestial objects. And so the three wise men are the three stars in Orion's belt. And so on. And basically that all the major items in the story in the New Testament, for example, with the baby Jesus, can be seen on the night sky. I'll give another example of this. When Jesus is dead, it is said that he stays in his tomb for 3 days. Astrotheologians, they will postulate, or they say that on the 21st, when it is winter solstice, then from standing on Earth, it looks as if the sun does not move for 3 days. But on December the 24th, then if you have a very, very good eye, then you can discern a small movement. And that's why that Jesus, because Jesus in these astrotheologians' point of view was an allegory of the sun. And therefore, on the third day, Jesus is resurrected, because on the third day, the sun starts to move again. Of course, we know that the sun stands still, but because of how things move and so on. So that was another example of this. 2 examples, but I will highly recommend all interested to go watch, when we are done or tomorrow, go watch Zeitgeist, because they build their research on the author I mentioned before, Acharya S., whom my father was in contact with for about 20 years. A very, very brilliant person, and the one who's the best author and authority on this matter. I can only say that I was astonished when I first was introduced to this. And I saw, as I said, Jeff, he has a whole chapter about this subject also in his book. So.
Oh, that sounds a good.
And you know, it's intuitively very, very convincing, I think, because our forefathers, they didn't have television. They wasn't watching Who's Got Talent on British television and or the BBC. And so what were they doing? I mean, it was very dark, like where I am here in northern Jutland. It's very dark outside. There's no city, there are no lights. And if I didn't have a roof, well, I would be looking up into the stars. So it's a complete different way of thinking, but and I'm only touching on it on a very superficial level right now, but it's very different. And those of my father, as Michelle also knows, was very interested also in the megalithic culture. And those who knows about the megalithic culture knows that they were many of the monuments we see around the world, Stonehenge and so on. They were like for measuring time and seeing when it's winter solstice, when it's summer solstice, and so on. So they were very interested in this. So we have to understand that there was a consciousness that was very different from the modern consciousness. And that sort of consciousness that existed at that time would, of course, create stories that reflected it. And therefore, it came up with these things that are very foreign to us, because we we are tame animals today. We don't know what it's to be human beings anymore. But yeah.
No,
so that was a very brief introduction. Sorry. Yeah.
No, thanks very much for rounding out that aspect. It says here 2 participants raised hands. Are these new raised hands? Is that Linda? Oh yeah, please.
I just wanted to add something. At last year's Heathen Women's Conference, you know, we have an annual Heathen Women's Conference International. Prudence Jones gave a paper on mapping the heathen cosmology across the night skies, based on sort of historical work. She's a doctor, Prudence Jones, based on sort of any historical documents she could find. And it was really interesting. I just think maybe she's someone that could be invited along.
She gave a talk on precisely that topic at a Moot some time ago.
Right.
Yeah, so and it's a shame that she isn't here this evening. But,
yeah, it was fascinating. But the other thing, does anybody here know Jeff Roberts? It's just a strange question. Does anybody know Jeff Roberts?
I didn't at all.
Because if he wrote, does anybody know if he wrote a book on Stonehenge, something like 101 things you can do at Stonehenge or something? Because if it is, I met him. It's just,
oh really?
I met a Jeff Roberts at a conference who'd written this book about various things to do with Stonehenge, and it's the same spelling. And I just wondered if it was the same man that I'd met. That was all.
Niels, is that likely that it was?
No, Jeff Roberts, he died from cancer in 2012. But
I met it was a long time before that. It must have been about 2005 or 6.
So when you say that, I think of one person in Britain who I associate with these things that we talk about, and that was John Michel, but not just Jeff
no,
Roberts.
not John Michel.
No,
this is someone. It was supposed to be a different one, but this is someone called. I have the book, but it was someone called Jeff Roberts.
Okay.
But it must be a different one. Sorry, I just wanted to know if it was the same man.
Who knows? Who knows?
Who knows now? I don't know.
Michael, is that a new hand raised?
Well, me?
Yes.
No, I was. Well, I mean, I could make a point, but it wasn't actually. But no, nothing really apart from it was fascinating. Perhaps one point that didn't come up, which is, of course, the importance of the fulfillment of prophecy in the Gospels, and not only they're looking forward, but they're looking back. This birth in Bethlehem as in Micah, and then this extraordinary, very unconvincing, but for the point of view of fulfillment of prophecy, convincing, that the cry of Eli, Eli, Tala Sabachthani, I've almost got it right, is taken from the Psalms. Well, historically, nobody in agony on the cross is going to think, oh, I'm now going to quote the Psalms and cry out the Psalms. But as an artistic fulfillment of prophecy, it makes sense, and historically it makes no sense. I'll just be a point I'd throw in. It's this fulfillment and the element in the Gospels that they're always striving to fulfill what was prophesied in the Hebrew Bible.
That, I mean, the mention of prophecy makes me want to make the point that the scholarly consensus, I think, stemming from Albert Schweitzer's book, the search of the historical Jesus, is to look at the Gospels in the sequence in which they seem to have been written, and to perceive that in Mark, he is very much, Jesus is a prophet of the end of the world. The end of the world is nigh, as people carry around placards saying, and says things, people that are with me now will not taste death before the Son of Man comes and transforms the world. This sense of him as an apocalyptic prophet, that diminishes throughout the Gospels, and in Mark, it's not. Sorry, in John, the final one, it's not there at all. He's just regarded as God, and because obviously now that aspect of Jesus isn't stressed because it clearly didn't happen. The end of the world did not end.
Yes. Right.
So they don't tend to sort of talk about that, because that seems to me is very likely to be true because of the fact that it is obviously false, and we all know it's false. So it's not something that would have been inserted by later Christians. So, oh yeah, let's put this into the mouth of our leader that he got this wrong about the end of the world. So that seems to be very likely to be true, and that's one of the reasons I do think that is the Jesus of history for me. One who is basically teaching Judaism, i.e. the way to salvation is following the law, attending to the commandments. However, in Paul, you don't have to believe in the commandments, the law. You just have to believe in Jesus, and that's quite a different thing, really, which is the origin of Christianity, which is quite different. Yeah, Alan,
just to re-emphasise more or less what Michael said, I think the important thing to bear in mind is that there is so many inconsistencies in the four Gospels I mean, John is radically different.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And I am convinced John was talking about a different person to the other three. The name Jesus was actually quite a common name in that part of the world known as Judea. It was quite a common name. And just more or less to end on a humorous note, a gag I heard a little while ago, if Jesus was Jewish, how come he has a Mexican name? I'm going to leave you on that.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the points that has been demonstrated very clear is the vast complexity of this subject. The fact that we've been able to have a conversation for 2 hours, very animated conversation. We've mentioned a wide variety of things. Lots of people have contributed, and so I think that's right. It is a still living topic because of our history, which will always be our history, and Christianity is still an issue, and it you know, it's a good thing to talk about, even though this is nominally a more pagan orientated forum. You know, it is important to look at this, as Niels said, that there were lots of influences. I mean, the Buddhist influence isn't something I'd ever really conceived, and I think that does make sense. I went to a lecture not that long ago about ancient India, and about the fact that there were more Roman coins found in India than there are in Europe, I think was said, which I thought was astonishing. And one forgets the movement of peoples and the movement of ideas, and the idea that there was some sort of Buddhist influence is to me not entirely impossible, and one shouldn't rule out those thoughts. So, and it's an interesting thought. I mean, we've been going for over 2 hours, so I think maybe we should come to an end. And thank Niels very much for providing such a stimulating and entertaining presentation of facts, and doing so with great humility and truthfulness as well, which makes for a very enjoyable occasion. No one is claiming absolute knowledge, and this is a subject bigger than us. So, you know, we're all very grateful for coming, Niels, and anyone who would be interested in reading Jeff's book, please send me an email. I can forward the PDF, and you know, the whole matter can be continued. Now, before I blow out the candle, I mean, anyone that's not said anything, you know, certainly welcome to say something. Catherine, Mike, or Mick, Dirk, or Niels' mother. Nice that you're still here, supporting your son. I appreciate that. So if no one has any final comments, I'll say a few words in Old Norse, and then I'll blow out the candle. Amautugier og miskunnsimme asier, at kveldi skal der gløyfe, kono bremd maki røynde moje givin ise I det kemur øl trykket og at not skal krøld løyfe. Blessed gods of our peoples and mans, at evening shall one praise the day, and at night shall one praise the evening. We're thankful for what we profited by and what we found pleasure in. Sigur idor, sigur os, sigur os. Frieder idor, idor, frieder os, frieder os. Thanks once again to Niels. Thanks to everyone who's attended, who's made very good points, and just kept with us as a community today. So thanks very much. Any feedback, please forward it to me, and I can forward it to Niels, as this is an ongoing conversation. So I wish everyone a good evening, and look forward to our next meeting. Bye bye, everyone.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Thanks once again, Niels.
Thank you.